The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of the Naval Academy as Admiral Richardson strode confidently toward the shooting range. His polished boots clicked against the concrete walkway, each step echoing his authority and decades of military experience. Behind him, a small crowd of naval officers and cadets followed, their faces filled with curiosity and anticipation. Sarah Mitchell walked among them, her civilian clothes making her stand out like a lighthouse against the sea of Navy uniforms. She was a journalist who had been granted rare access to document the Academy's training programs. At 28, she had already earned recognition for her fearless reporting, but today felt different. Today, she was about to witness something that would change her understanding of courage and skill forever. The Admiral had been boasting during the morning briefing about his exceptional marksmanship skills. His chest had swelled with pride as he recounted tales of his shooting competitions and hunting expeditions. The other officers nodded respectfully, accustomed to his stories of triumph and glory. Admiral Richardson was known throughout the Navy for his ego, but also for his genuine expertise with firearms. As they approached the outdoor shooting range, Sarah noticed a woman in her early 40s standing quietly near the equipment shed. She wore simple work clothes and had calloused hands that spoke of years of physical labor. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she worked as a maintenance supervisor at the Academy. Few people paid attention to her, despite the fact that she had been keeping the facilities in perfect condition for over 15 years. Elena had been born and raised in a small town in Texas, where her father had taught her shoot when she was barely 8 years old. Growing up on a ranch, she had learned that precision with a rifle meant the difference between feeding her family and going hungry. Her father, a former military man himself, had instilled in her not just the technical aspects of shooting, but also the mental discipline required for true marksmanship. The Admiral gestured toward the shooting range with theatrical flair, his voice carrying across the open area as he addressed his audience. He spoke about the importance of firearms training in naval operations and the pride that came with being an expert marksman. The targets had been set up at various distances, from 50 yards to 200 yards, each one presenting a different challenge. Sarah pulled out her notebook and began recording details of the scene. The range was immaculate, with 6 targets positioned at different angles and distances. The morning air was still, with barely a whisper of wind that might affect bullet trajectory. It was perfect conditions for shooting, and the Admiral seemed pleased with the setup. Elena continued her work nearby, checking the target mechanisms and ensuring everything was functioning properly. She had overheard the Admiral's boasting and felt a familiar stirring in her chest. It was not anger, exactly, but rather a quiet confidence that came from years of practice and natural talent. She had been watching military personnel use this range for years, and while many were skilled, few possessed the instinctive understanding of firearms that she had developed. The Admiral selected his rifle from the equipment rack, a precision instrument worth thousands of dollars. He handled it with the reverence of someone who truly appreciated fine weaponry. The other officers gathered around, offering words of encouragement and anticipation. Some of the younger cadets pulled out their phones, hoping to capture video of their superior demonstrating his legendary skills. As the Admiral began his preparation routine, checking the weapon and adjusting his stance, Elena found herself moving closer. She was not intentionally eavesdropping, but her work required her to be in the vicinity, and she could not help but observe the proceedings. There was something in the Admiral's demeanor that reminded her of other men she had encountered over the years, men who mistook confidence for competence. Sarah noticed Elena's presence and was struck by the woman's quiet intensity. While everyone else was focused on the Admiral, Elena seemed to be studying the targets, the wind conditions, and the overall setup with the eye of someone who understood the complexities involved. It was a moment that Sarah would remember later when everything changed. The Admiral raised his rifle and took aim at the first target. The crowd fell silent, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the distance. This was the moment that would set everything in motion, the beginning of a demonstration that no one present would ever forget. The rifle cracked sharply against the morning silence, and Admiral Richardson's first shot rang across the range. Through the spotting scope, the officers could see that the bullet had struck near the center of the target, though not quite in the bullseye. The Admiral's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure as murmurs of approval came from the gathered crowd. Sarah scribbled notes about the Admiral's technique, noting how he positioned himself and controlled his breathing. She had covered military stories before, but had never paid close attention to the actual mechanics of marksmanship. The precision required seemed almost meditative, requiring both physical control and mental focus that impressed her. Elena continued her work, but her attention was divided between her maintenance duties and the demonstration unfolding nearby. She could see small details that the others missed, the slight tremor in the Admiral's grip, the way he rushed his breathing between shots, and how he was fighting against the rifle's natural balance rather than working with it. These were subtle flaws that would become more pronounced as the pressure mounted. The Admiral fired his second shot, again hitting the target but missing the center ring. His confidence began to show hairline cracks as he realized his performance was not living up to his reputation. The officers continued to offer polite encouragement, but Sarah could sense a shift in the atmosphere. The younger cadets exchanged quick glances, their phones still recording, but with less enthusiasm than before. For his third attempt, Admiral Richardson took more time, adjusting his stance and breathing deeply before squeezing the trigger. The bullet struck closer to the center, earning genuine approval from the crowd. He smiled broadly, his ego partially restored by the improved shot. However, Elena could see that he had overcorrected his technique and was now fighting different problems with his form. The fourth target proved more challenging, positioned at a greater distance and at an angle that required compensation for both range and trajectory. The Admiral's shot went wide, missing the center entirely and barely hitting the outer ring of the target. His face flushed red, and for the first time, his confident demeanor began to crack visibly. Sarah watched the Admiral's growing frustration with professional interest. She had seen similar scenarios in other high-pressure situations, where accomplished individuals found themselves struggling when their skills were put on display. The psychology of performance under observation was something that fascinated her, and she could see the internal battle playing out in the Admiral's body language. The fifth shot was even worse, missing the target completely and striking the dirt backstop behind it. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group as the Admiral lowered his rifle, his face now clearly showing embarrassment and anger. The officers tried to maintain their respectful demeanor, but the atmosphere had become tense and awkward. Elena had been watching the entire performance while organizing equipment nearby. She understood exactly what was happening. The Admiral was a competent shooter under normal circumstances, but he lacked the mental discipline to perform consistently under pressure. His technique was adequate but not exceptional, and his ego was interfering with his ability to make necessary adjustments. The Admiral's pride would not allow him to simply accept his poor performance. Instead, he began making excuses about the rifle, the conditions, and the targets. He complained that the weapon was not properly zeroed and that the wind had picked up at just the wrong moments. The other officers nodded sympathetically, though several cast doubtful glances at the still morning air. As the Admiral grew more agitated, his voice rose and his complaints became more elaborate. He claimed that the targets had been positioned incorrectly and that the range itself was somehow flawed. Elena, who had personally verified every aspect of the setup that morning, felt her patience beginning to wear thin. She had heard similar excuses from countless individuals over the years, always from people who refused to acknowledge their own limitations. Sarah noticed Elena's reaction to the Admiral's complaints and became curious about the maintenance workers' obvious expertise. There was something in Elena's posture and attention to detail that suggested deep familiarity with firearms and shooting techniques. The journalist's instincts told her that there was more to this quiet woman than met the eye. The Admiral's frustration reached a boiling point when he declared that the rifle itself was defective. He held up the weapon and announced that no one could be expected to shoot accurately with such poor equipment. It was at this moment that Elena's professional pride overcame her natural inclination to remain in the background. Without thinking, Elena spoke up from her position near the equipment shed. Her voice was calm, but firm as she pointed out that the rifle had been perfectly calibrated just that morning and that the range conditions were ideal for shooting. Her tone was respectful, but carried the authority of someone who truly knew what she was talking about. The Admiral turned toward Elena with surprise and irritation, clearly not expecting to be contradicted by a maintenance worker. His military bearing kicked in, and he demanded to know who she thought she was to question his assessment. The confrontation that followed would change everything, setting the stage for a demonstration that no one present would ever forget. Admiral Richardson's face darkened as he turned his full attention toward Elena, his military bearing demanding respect and subservience from what he saw as a mere maintenance worker. The tension in the air became thick enough to cut with a knife as the other officers watched the confrontation unfold. Sarah felt her journalist instincts sharpen, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Elena stood her ground, her calloused hands steady at her sides, and her eyes meeting the Admiral's gaze without flinching. She had dealt with authority figures before who mistook volume for competence, and she was not intimidated by rank or uniform. Her father had taught her that respect was earned through skill and character, not through titles or position. The Admiral's voice carried the sharp edge of command authority as he questioned Elena's qualifications to comment on his shooting performance. He pointed out her civilian status and her role as maintenance staff, suggesting that she had no business offering opinions about military matters. The other officers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to support their superior or remain neutral in what was becoming an increasingly awkward situation. Elena's response was measured and professional, but it carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. She explained that maintaining the shooting range required extensive knowledge of firearms, ballistics, and marksmanship techniques. Her job involved testing equipment, calibrating weapons, and ensuring that everything functioned perfectly for the military personnel who used the facility. The Admiral's ego would not allow him to back down from the confrontation, especially in front of his subordinates and the journalist who was documenting everything. Instead of acknowledging Elena's expertise, he doubled down on his position, suggesting that theoretical knowledge was no substitute for practical military experience and proven combat skills. Sarah watched the exchange with growing fascination, taking detailed notes about both participants. The Admiral's defensiveness and Elena's calm confidence created a stark contrast that spoke volumes about their respective characters. The journalist could see that this was about much more than shooting accuracy. It was about pride, respect, and the assumptions people made based on appearances. Elena's patience finally reached its limit when the Admiral suggested that she probably did not even know how to handle a rifle safely, let alone shoot with any degree of accuracy. It was a condescending remark that struck at the core of her professional pride and personal identity. She had been shooting since childhood and had probably fired more rounds than most of the military personnel who used the facility. The challenge came naturally, almost without conscious thought. Elena suggested that if the Admiral truly believed the rifle was defective, perhaps she could demonstrate that the equipment was functioning properly. Her tone was respectful, but carried an unmistakable undercurrent of confidence that made everyone present take notice. Admiral Richardson's pride would not allow him to refuse what he saw as a challenge from a civilian. In his mind, there was no way that a maintenance worker could outshoot a decorated naval officer with decades of experience. He agreed to let Elena try the rifle, expecting her to prove his point about the equipment's supposed defects through her own poor performance. The other officers exchanged glances, unsure what to expect from this unexpected turn of events. Some seemed concerned about the potential embarrassment if their superior's judgment was proven wrong, while others appeared curious to see how the situation would resolve itself. The younger cadets raised their phones again, sensing that they might be about to witness something extraordinary. Elena approached the rifle with the reverence of someone who truly understood the responsibility that came with handling such a weapon. She checked the safety, examined the barrel, and tested the action with movements that spoke of years of experience and training. Her handling of the firearm was so natural and professional that even the skeptical officers began to take notice. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized she was about to witness something that could make for an incredible story. The dynamics of the situation had shifted completely, with the quiet maintenance worker now holding the spotlight while the decorated Admiral watched with a mixture of arrogance and barely concealed concern. The targets remained as they had been set up for the Admiral's demonstration, 6 different positions at varying distances and angles, each presenting its own unique challenge. The morning conditions were still perfect, with minimal wind and excellent visibility. Everything was in place for what promised to be either a spectacular vindication of the Admiral's position or an embarrassing reversal of fortune. Elena lifted the rifle and began her assessment of the targets, her eyes moving systematically from one to the next as she calculated distances, angles, and environmental factors. Her concentration was intense, but relaxed, like that of a professional who had performed similar tasks thousands of times before. The crowd fell silent, everyone suddenly aware that they were about to witness something special. The Admiral watched with growing unease as Elena's preparation demonstrated a level of expertise that he had not expected. Her stance, grip, and overall handling of the weapon showed the kind of instinctive competence that could only come from years of practice and natural talent. For the first time since the confrontation began, he wondered if he might have made a serious mistake in challenging this unassuming woman. Elena raised the rifle to her shoulder with fluid grace, her movements economical and precise in a way that immediately caught the attention of everyone present. The weapon seemed to become an extension of her body, settling into position as naturally as breathing. Her left hand found its perfect placement on the stock, while her right hand gripped the pistol grip with just enough pressure to maintain control without creating tension. Admiral Richardson watched with growing unease as Elena's preparation revealed a level of expertise that far exceeded his expectations. Her breathing pattern was controlled and rhythmic, her stance perfectly balanced, and her eye alignment with the scope was achieved with the unconscious competence of someone who had performed this routine thousands of times before. Sarah held her breath as Elena took aim at the first target, positioned at 50 yards and slightly to the left of center. The journalist could see the intense concentration on Elena's face, but it was the relaxed kind of focus that suggested confidence rather than strain. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just the calm preparation of a master craftsperson about to demonstrate her skill. The rifle cracked, and through the spotting scope, the officers could see that Elena's bullet had struck dead center in the bullseye. The shot was so perfectly placed that it could not have been improved by even a fraction of an inch. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as they realized they had just witnessed something exceptional. Without pausing to acknowledge the reactions around her, Elena smoothly transitioned to the second target. This one was positioned at 75 yards and required a slight elevation adjustment to account for the increased distance. Her movements were automatic and sure, showing no trace of the uncertainty that had plagued the Admiral's performance. The second shot was even more impressive than the first, if such a thing were possible. The bullet struck the exact center of the target with surgical precision, creating a hole that overlapped perfectly with the scoring ring. Several of the officers exchanged glances of amazement, beginning to realize that they were witnessing marksmanship skills that exceeded anything they had seen before. Elena's third target was positioned at 100 yards and angled to the right, presenting a more complex challenge that required compensation for both distance and positioning. She made minute adjustments to her stance and scope settings, her movements displaying the kind of technical knowledge that came from years of study and practice. The third shot continued Elena's perfect performance, striking the center of the target with the same devastating accuracy as the previous two. Admiral Richardson's face had gone pale as he watched his assumptions about civilian capabilities crumble before his eyes. The other officers were no longer trying to hide their amazement, and several were pointing out details of Elena's technique to their colleagues. The fourth target presented the greatest challenge yet, positioned at 150 yards and elevated to test the shooter's ability to compensate for trajectory drop over distance. Elena studied the target for a moment longer than the others, making calculations that were invisible to the observers but clearly vital to her approach. Sarah watched in fascination as Elena made subtle adjustments to her scope and stance, her movements showing the kind of precision that suggested an almost scientific understanding of ballistics and environmental factors. The journalist realized she was witnessing not just excellent shooting, but a demonstration of expertise that bordered on artistry. The fourth shot struck home with the same perfect accuracy as the others, adding another bullseye to Elena's growing collection. The crowd was now completely silent except for the occasional whispered comment about the incredible display they were witnessing. Even the younger cadets had stopped filming to simply stare in amazement at the unassuming woman who was redefining their understanding of marksmanship. The fifth target was positioned at the maximum range of 175 yards, angled sharply to the left, and requiring compensation for multiple environmental factors. It was the kind of shot that would challenge even experienced military snipers. Yet Elena approached it with the same calm confidence she had shown throughout her demonstration. Admiral Richardson found himself hoping that Elena would finally miss a shot, not out of malice, but because his ego desperately needed some validation that his earlier poor performance had been due to equipment problems rather than lack of skill. However, as he watched Elena's meticulous preparation for the challenging shot, he began to suspect that his hopes would be disappointed. Elena's fifth shot was perhaps the most impressive of all, given the extreme difficulty of the target placement. The bullet struck dead center despite the complex calculations required, proving beyond any doubt that her accuracy was no accident or lucky streak. She was simply operating at a level of skill that none of the military personnel present had ever encountered before. The final target waited at 200 yards, positioned straight ahead, but at maximum distance for the range. It was a shot that would test every aspect of Elena's marksmanship abilities, from her understanding of ballistics to her physical control of the weapon. The crowd held its collective breath as she prepared for what would either be the culmination of an perfect performance or the one shot that proved she was human after all. Elena took slightly longer to prepare for this final shot, making careful adjustments and double-checking her calculations. The extra time only served to build tension among the observers, who were now completely invested in seeing whether she could complete what would be a flawless demonstration of shooting excellence. Elena's finger found the trigger with the same gentle precision she had demonstrated throughout her remarkable performance. The final target wavered slightly in her scope at the extreme 200-yard distance, but her breathing was steady and her aim true. The crowd around her had fallen into complete silence, every person present understanding that they were about to witness the conclusion of something extraordinary. The rifle spoke one last time, its sharp crack echoing across the range and seeming to hang in the air longer than usual. Through the spotting scope, the observers watched as Elena's sixth bullet struck the center of the distant target with the same devastating precision as all the others. 6 shots, 6 perfect bullseyes, each one placed with surgical accuracy that defied explanation. Admiral Richardson stood in stunned silence, his earlier confidence completely shattered by what he had just witnessed. His complaint about defective equipment now seemed not just wrong, but embarrassingly petty in the face of Elena's flawless demonstration. The rifle that he had claimed was unsuitable had just been used to achieve shooting perfection that few marksmen could match even under ideal conditions. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized the significance of what she had just documented. This was not simply a story about good shooting. It was a profound lesson about assumptions, respect, and the dangerous tendency to judge people based on their appearance or social position. Elena had just demolished every stereotype about civilian capabilities and gender roles with 6 perfectly placed bullets. The other officers began to murmur among themselves, their voices filled with amazement and, in some cases, embarrassment about their initial dismissal of Elena's capabilities. Several of the younger cadets were already discussing how they would describe this incredible demonstration to their classmates, knowing that many would find it difficult to believe. Elena carefully secured the rifle and checked that the safety was engaged before setting it down on the shooting bench. Her demeanor throughout the entire demonstration had remained calm and professional, showing no trace of arrogance or self-congratulation despite her perfect performance. She simply nodded to the group and began to walk back toward the equipment shed to resume her maintenance duties. Admiral Richardson found himself faced with a choice that would define his character for everyone present. He could continue to make excuses and attempt to diminish Elena's achievement, or he could acknowledge what had just happened and show the grace that his rank and position demanded. The decision would reveal whether his military bearing extended to accepting difficult truths about his own limitations. To his credit, the Admiral chose the path of honor. He approached Elena with measured steps and extended his hand in a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. His voice was quiet but clear as he thanked her for demonstrating the quality of the equipment and apologized for his earlier comments about her qualifications. It was a moment that transformed potential humiliation into an opportunity for growth and understanding. Elena accepted the Admiral's handshake with the same professionalism she had shown throughout the encounter. She explained that her father had been a Marine sergeant who had taught her that shooting was about respect for the weapon, understanding of the fundamentals, and countless hours of practice. Her skills have been earned through dedication and discipline, not through any innate talent or lucky breaks. Sarah approached Elena as the crowd began to disperse, eager to learn more about the remarkable woman who had just redefined her understanding of expertise and capability. The journalist's questions revealed a fascinating background of ranch life, military family traditions, and years of quiet dedication to perfecting skills that most people never suspected she possessed. The story that Sarah would eventually write about this encounter would focus not just on Elena's remarkable shooting demonstration, but on the broader lessons about judgment, respect, and the hidden talents that exist in unexpected places. She would describe how a decorated naval officer's assumptions had been challenged by a maintenance worker whose quiet competence spoke louder than any boasting or credentials. Elena's perfect shooting performance became legendary within the Naval Academy community, but she continued to approach her work with the same humble professionalism that had characterized her before the demonstration. She never sought attention or recognition for her skills, instead taking satisfaction in knowing that she had upheld the standards of excellence that her father had instilled in her years before. The 6 targets remained posted on the range for weeks afterward, serving as a reminder to everyone who visited about the day when a quiet maintenance supervisor had delivered a masterclass in marksmanship and humility. Students and officers would point out the perfectly centered bullet holes and share the story of Elena's demonstration with newcomers to the academy. Admiral Richardson's experience that morning changed his approach to leadership and his assumptions about the people around him. He began to take more time to understand the backgrounds and capabilities of the civilian personnel who supported military operations, recognizing that expertise and dedication could be found in many forms and places. The encounter at the shooting range became a defining moment for everyone present, demonstrating that true skill and character could not be measured by rank, uniform, or social position. Elena had proven that respect must be earned through competence and integrity, and that the most impressive demonstrations of excellence often came from the most unexpected sources. Her 6 perfect shots had hit more than just targets. They had struck at the heart of prejudice and assumption, leaving everyone present with a deeper understanding of what it meant to judge others fairly and accurately.